How bad is the beautiful game when it comes to abuse? Mesut Ozil quit the German football team, citing racism and discrimination. Well, today we have three professional observers of the game with us who say not enough is being done, even though there's been some progress, along with a player who's been on the receiving end of abuse and is trying to stop it now. You're watching Roundtable. I'm David Foster. Unfortunately, Mesut Ozil's story isn't unusual, although his reaction to the abuse has brought with it quite a lot of discussion. Most discrimination abuse relates to race, sex, or faith. So what are football's governing bodies doing to combat the problem?
I'm German when we win, but I'm an immigrant when we lose. The words of Mesut Ozil, who resigned from the national team over racist treatment. And recent incidents have prompted calls for tougher action from governing bodies. Can racism and abuse be completely tackled out of the beautiful game? Third-generation Turkish-German player Mesut Ozil was a key member of Germany's 2014 World Cup success. He's been voted the national team's Player of the Year by fans 5 times since 2011. But when he posed for a photo with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan before the World Cup, he was accused of endorsing his bid for re-election. Ozil bore the brunt of Germany's failure at the tournament and said he'd been the victim of racism and discrimination. Germany's Football Association has emphatically rejected racism allegations. Discrimination in the game is a political football. In 2013, Milan player Kevin Prince Boateng had walked off during a match after opposing fans abused him with monkey noises. FIFA brought a series of reforms, including relegation or expulsion from competitions. UEFA also introduced a minimum 10-match ban for racist abuse by players or officials, and fines and stadium closures for clubs. Fans are harder to control. In Russia, 19 incidents of abusive chants were recorded last season before the World Cup.
Quase todos os jogos tem sempre isso comigo. Eu agora vi que não adianta ficar chateado, até porque se eu ficar chateado, não vou render. Os árbitros verem, faz vista grossa, não coloca no regulamento, então acontece sempre isso comigo, eu simplesmente mando beijo para a torcida.
Anti-discrimination campaigners Kick It Out said it received reports for 282 incidences of discriminatory abuse halfway through last season in the UK. Most incidents are related to race, sex or faith. During the World Cup in Russia, FIFA set up a diversity fan zone.
I think there's always a possibility for FIFA and for other actors in society to do more, but we must say we're very comfortable and extremely proud of the work that has been done.
Ironically, the safe space meant to celebrate minorities was shut down by St. Petersburg authorities. It's almost 2 years since FIFA wound up its anti-racism task force. What more should football's governing bodies do? Is football being unfairly punished for societal problems? Or is this an opportunity for the world's biggest sport to rise above the rest?
And that is just one of the points we will be discussing at today's Roundtable. Pleased to say that joining us from Berlin, we have Erich Laaser, sports journalist and TV commentator for more than 30 years. Here at the Roundtable, Ian Payne, UK sports broadcaster, Osei Sankofa, former Premier League football for Charlton Athletic and now works for Kick It Out. And we have from Italy, the journalist and TV commentator Vieri Capretta. Thank you very much indeed. Erich, I'm going to come to you first of all, since this was where the Ozil affair unwound itself. How did the German Football Association handle itself? What kind of example did it set in the way that it dealt with this?
Well, to be honest, it was a bad example for handling such a crisis. And it was the first time in history that the German Football Association went out of the World Cup so early, and they were not used to it. And so they didn't have any instrument to work on that. And then there was Mesut Ozil, and his pick was Erdogan just before the World Cup started. There was a first mistake Ozil had made. The second one was that he didn't explain why he had done this. He was silent all the time until he resigned 8 or 9 days ago from now. And the German Football Association was not able to tell him to speak to the media, to speak to the people who wanted to know why, Mesut, why did you do this? Because your president is not Mr. Erdogan, it's the president of your father and your mother, but your president is Mr. Steinmeier in Berlin and not in Istanbul.
But interesting that you should say this was the first of the mistakes that he made, as though he was in part responsible for the situation in which he found himself, whereas in fact he cited, what was it, racism and disrespect.
They should have solved it together. The German Football Association, the DFB and his president, Mr. Grindel, and Mesut, and just to mention it, his advisors, because I'm quite sure that his advisors put him into this situation, first of all, when bringing him to Mr. Erdogan, together with İlkay Gündoğan, the other player from Germany who is playing in the Premier League in England, and then when he resigned from the team with his explanation, 3 pages of many interesting words in English. I'm quite sure that Mesut alone could never have fixed that.
But it almost appears to me that you are saying he's a victim of circumstance, that he was badly advised, that the situation was out of his control, rather than that he was a victim of racism and a victim of abuse.
Look at the situation in Europe in these days. The right-wing parties everywhere, in France, in Italy and in Germany, they're coming up. And so racism and discrimination are stronger nowadays than maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And so everybody in Germany knew almost about this case of Ozil, and it was easy to find a scapegoat with Mesut for the loss of the title in Russia.
Do you think it would have been different in, let's say, the English FA?
Well, we were talking about this before we came on air, and we were trying to think of an example of maybe an English international footballer whose parents maybe had been born in another country, and I couldn't really think of what. I would like to think that that situation wouldn't happen with the English FA, and what I find very unfortunate about it, I can understand all the flack that Mesut Ozil got from people on Twitter. Everyone's got an opinion now. But when the federation comes out and criticises somebody for doing what he did, who knows why he had to stand and have his picture taken with the Turkish president. But the fact was he did it, you know, and he has got links to Turkey. And I just think the whole thing has been blown completely out of proportion. And if Germany had won the World Cup, we wouldn't be here.
What should the German Football Federation perhaps have done?
Well, I think if you look at, you know, Mesut Ozil's statement, it's a lengthy statement. He's obviously been harbouring some of these views for a very long time. There's clearly been a breakdown in communication between himself and the German FA, and with what's been going on in the media in the build-up to the World Cup, during the World Cup, and afterwards. And I think, as has been mentioned, this should have been nipped in the bud a lot earlier.
I suppose the question, rather than putting the spotlight entirely on Ozil himself, what I'm saying is to set an example and show that it disapproves of racism or abuse of any kind. What should the German Football Federation have done in that case, rather than specifically with Ozil?
To address a wider issue would have been a better thing to do. It clearly seems that Mesut Ozil has been scapegoated, and he's the one that's all at blame. But this is not an isolated incident with a player of dual heritage feeling that they have been rejected or outcasted. So I think it's a wider issue. Unfortunately for Mesut Ozil, he's been held up as the main person. But
are you talking about examples within the English game?
No, I think in life, in general, and I think if we go back many, many years, if we look at someone like John Barnes, for example, who had a great career, he was a great player, but he was sometimes questioned about his loyalty perhaps to the English flag, and is he really English? He was, he's got Jamaican ancestry, and that was something that was highlighted as well. So I don't think this is something that is new. I think that is something that has been around for a long time. I don't expect the German FA to bring up John Barnes, but I think this is not an uncommon issue. Well,
Kick It Out was launched when?
Kick It Out was launched 25 years ago.
25 years ago, and we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
Vieri, when it comes to Erich's suggestion that this is a continent-wide, perhaps a global problem because of the rise of populism. Is it something that you see? You look at the game in different countries as well.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree, because I think what was very interesting about this Ozil case in Germany is that Germany as a country have got an integration that other countries don't necessarily have, aren't at that stage yet. I'm thinking obviously of Italy, for example, where both in society as a whole and within football, we don't have that many Italians with dual nationalities yet, as many as the Germans, or think about the French team or even England. They are at a different stage. So that's why I was very surprised that all this came up in a country like Germany.
Well, you wouldn't have been surprised if it was Italy. I mean, I'm discounting the fact that you don't get many dual nationals, but
I would have been less surprised.
And these days, with the rise of the far right,
well,
La Liga and 5-star?
Right now, with the current situation in Italy, it's completely gone completely mental, right? With constant aggressions to people in the streets and things like that. So that will inevitably happen in football as well, with racist chants. It's almost on a weekly basis. It goes out of the radar in Italy compared to other countries. There's a lot more tolerance. They close the eye, and that's why, again, to me, the fact that happened to Germany was a big surprise. In Italy, we've had Mario Balotelli as a scapegoat, especially in 2014 when Italy did very bad at the World Cup. Nobody cared about his skin color in 2012 when he scored goals to get us to the Euro Cup final. So I think the whole point of finding a scapegoat for a bad result remains key in something like sports.
Ian, you're a professional broadcaster. You ask the questions. You know what.
Well, I'll tell you what, the question I would really like to ask, and I suppose it's a question that I should direct towards Germany, is I saw something that had been launched because of this Ozil story. It was their version of the Me Too campaign, which had been launched by an immigrant who was now a German national. And I'd like to know whether or not this has created a more nationwide debate, not just about footballers with dual nationality, or at least footballers with ancestry from a previous generations. But is this actually becoming a discussion point widely across the whole of Germany, or is this still just a very minor thing, criticising a footballer because he happened to take an unfortunate picture in people's...
And Eric, you were nodding. You heard Ian's question.
I live in Berlin. We have many people from Turkey in Berlin. And many people of them were asked right now, after this Ozil case, how they feel in Germany. And many of them joined this new Me Too campaign and said, we have discrimination everywhere. We are not talking about football only, we're talking about the normal life. When you come anywhere, many people say, what do you want here? You're not German. Although they are German because their father or their mother came from Turkey to Berlin, and they were born in Germany, and they are Germans. We have the question of refugees. It started 3 years ago. Many people came to Germany from foreign countries, very foreign countries. We have always had here people from England, from France, from Italy, from Portugal. Nobody really did care. But now there are people from Arabia, from Afghanistan and so on, and they look strange to many people. And this, together with the upcoming strength of the far right, people are feared. They are afraid of strange people, and that's how the racism and the discrimination today works in the German society.
Well, let me bring it back to something that I mentioned to you before we went on air, Ian. Richard Williams, sports writer
yes.
in this country. He wrote, Mesut Ozil's retirement sadly illustrates that in a polarising world, the ideas of multiculturalism are struggling to regain the upper hand. Therefore, your efforts at Kick It Out have to be redoubled.
Yeah, that will be tough with the resources and the team that we have. But as I said, we have been working for 25 years, and what we tried to focus on is the next generation of football leaders and young people coming up and rising, whether that's professional football players, whether that's staff at football clubs, and hopefully those people that go on to management positions throughout clubs. We hope to be able to educate and change those minds and change those perceptions so that the discrimination that we've seen no longer continues.
Difficult one to know how to measure success, though, isn't it?
Of course, but I think if we look at the rise in the incidence of discrimination...
What did we say, 282 by halfway through last season?
Yeah.
I've got a good example of how it's got better.
Yeah.
I do a radio phone-in show, And we had this extraordinary call from someone before the World Cup saying he hoped the England team would do badly because of the number of non-white players in the team. And there was not one reaction to that that agreed with him. Every single person who got in touch, and there were hundreds of people, both on the phone, on Twitter, on email, on text, all saying, this guy is outdated, he's an anachronism.
But it's heartening to hear that, but what does it actually say about how things have changed?
I think that now, if you go to a football match now and you shout out racist abuse, whoever the player might be, in the context of a football match where everyone's allowed to almost say what they like, you will get found out. People will report you if you say that now. I don't think that people throwing bananas and shouting at black players I don't think it goes on, if at all. It might go on a bit, but I think stewards now, other members of the crowd, will actually do something if someone says that.
Vieri, it's not just down to the governing bodies, is it? As Ian's suggesting here, it's societal pressure as well. And that's what we've got to worry about, with the rise of the far right and perhaps anti-immigrant sentiment supposedly gaining more popularity.
Well, what he just said.
But you have crowds saying it wouldn't, no?
I mean, in Italy, there's this idea, this very, very general cultural idea that the state is something different, and so citizens help each other against the governing bodies. It's exactly the same in a football stadium. If someone chants or racist chants or abuse, nobody's going to actually report him.
Really?
I've never seen it happen. If anything, they
would they try and stop him doing it?
Yeah, they might, but they're not gonna. You know, someone who does that knows there's no consequences to them personally. You know, the governing body might fine the club or ban fans for the next game. So it's always the same kind of measures, and they've been repeatedly used, and they're not really working.
So is it window dressing in Italy? They have to say something is wrong, and therefore they do say it's wrong, whereas in fact they don't really mind that much?
I wouldn't go as far as saying they don't mind, but there's nothing like Kick It Out, for example, something that works on the next generations, on education. It's all a reaction to something that's just happened.
Has the problems, the immigration problems you've had from boats coming from Libya, has that created more of a problem with immigrants, black immigrants from Africa arriving in Sicily and southern ports?
Well, it has happened. I mean, it's a huge issue in Italy because they arrive on a daily basis, and it's been, you know, a big part of the latest elections. And we have cases of abuse on a daily basis in the streets. And as I said, it will reflect in the next season of football. I feel there's going to be a lot of that. Now, it's a matter of the tolerance by the governing bodies, and of course, people standing up and saying, look, you can't just do this, I'll report you. And
as you say, there isn't somebody there to do that. I say, when you started as a professional footballer, were things a great deal worse than you would perceive them to be now? You're not in a dressing room on a weekly or a daily basis, but you hear a lot of stories.
Yeah, you do hear a lot of stories, and I think when I was, you know, if I take my mind back, I joined Charlton Athletic as a 14-year-old. I was travelling into Eltham 3-4 times a week, and we'll all remember the story of Stephen Lawrence. So this was literally in the backdrop of that period. So it wasn't racism at the football club we were most concerned with. It was making sure that we got in and out of the area. Okay, just got home safely. We were very aware of the tensions within the area. At the football club, we had, you know, being at a South London football club, it was quite a diverse club already. So we wasn't so concerned with overt racism as such. The subtle racism definitely existed. And
is there such a thing?
Compared to overt racism,
well, what is
So subtle, I would say, are stereotypical comments, singling out of black players. That's always happened. That still happens today. And depending on the type of character you are, you'll either laugh it off, you'll either bite back, or you'll have a really big reaction to it. It just depends on the character.
I think the one area where we could improve, I think it's the racism towards players definitely has improved in terms of it's very rare that you hear that now. But there's still a problem, isn't there, with getting black managers into football clubs. They are still appallingly low rates.
And it's years since we had a first black England captain, Paul Ince. I mean, so why hasn't that changed?
I don't know.
Well, again, it's hard to be England captain. I would say that it's really tough, and one person's usually got it for a long time. And I think it will happen. I think the management issue is probably a bigger issue
well, what
right
about
now.
this Rooney rule, where I think it's not nothing to do with Wayne Rooney. It's an American idea that means that you have to shortlist people of ethnic minorities when you're coming to high-profile sports jobs.
Well, it means that the clubs will be required to interview at least one BAME candidate for a position.
Yeah.
That's all it means at the moment. Many clubs are doing that and going through that process, and some clubs...
Is it something that you would kick out encourage?
Yeah, I think so. I think it gives people a seat at the table. It gives people an opportunity to put their hat in the ring. Traditionally, and as with most industries, football is quite a closed industry. It's very much a who you know kind of game. And, you know, the game has been dominated by, you know, if we say white men, because we live in England and that's how it's been. But that is changing, and people want to get into those networks. And this is a way and given an opportunity for people to, as I say, put their hat in the ring.
Just a quick thought before we go back to Germany, and unless you've got something you want to say. You talked about laughing it off, saying nothing, or reacting to it. Is there a right way?
As I said, I think it depends on the individual. I think some people, you can't really question somebody's reaction. If somebody feels in their heart that I need to react in a certain way because of how they've been treated, I don't think you can question that. If it's wrong, is wrong, regardless.
Yeah, can I just say that this whole stereotypes are a thing. I mean, I've played football in England. Obviously, I'm Italian, and the whole stereotypical thing of, oh, you're Italian, anything that could pop up from pasta to pizza. Yeah. It's a kind of jokes that come up in a change.
Yeah, I don't consider that racist, do you? I mean, if the French call me a rosbif.
Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I think there is a certain level of how you laugh it off or how you react to it.
That's joshing, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say that. But you know, changing room is it's a very interesting place to be. And I think it's also very difficult to change things in a changing room.
Well, there was the Russian footballer at Arsenal, Arshavin, and all his teammates used to call him Meerkat because of the adverts with, you know, the Russian meerkat.
Is that terrible?
I don't know whether that's is that banter? Is that racist? I don't know what it is.
What I would just say to that is there is a context as well to the stereotypes that, for example, my father coming here as a 6-year-old has grown up in a climate of not just banter and stereotypes and little comments, but violence and abuse. So there are lots of different layers to this.
And surely the most sensible thing is, if you think it might possibly offend or do some harm, then you don't banter. You don't do anything like that.
Yeah.
You step away from it.
Of course,
treat
but
people with respect.
Of course, but that hasn't been the culture within football. And just a last point. I know you want to move on.
No, it's not. I'm interested.
Yeah. So for people who have experienced growing up in this kind of environment, as I said, of anything from violence to name calling, once you get into a working environment and you're thinking to yourself, we still have to go through this. This is what my father used to tell me about. This is what my uncle used to tell me about. That's why, for many people, it's not just a joke.
So the problem is still there. And Erich, I'd just like you to react to something that Vieri said. He was worried that this coming season in Italian football, for instance, is going to perhaps be one of the most difficult, given the rising sentiments of populism across Europe.
Well, you must not look always at the first division, like what happened to Kevin Prince Boateng some years ago with Milan. Or what happens in the Bundesliga. If you go down to the lower classes, you have discrimination almost every weekend. And somehow, I'm sad to say, but it's somehow normal that the spectators shout on the players and the players shout at each other. And that's quite a normal situation in football. It's in Germany, and I think it's in the other countries the same one.
Are you suggesting that there's nothing really that can be done to end it?
Well, I think it's a question of education. You must start with the young people, with the young pupils in the school. You must talk to them about racism and what to do against it. You must talk to them about diversity and about anti-discrimination, and maybe that helps. But if you have grown-up people, I don't think that you will can do anything. You must start with the young people to educate them better, to know more about the world and how it could be.
Erich, thank you very much indeed. Osei, with Kick It Out, is it a war that can be won?
Yeah, I think we have to believe that. We're working very hard, and it was interesting that was just mentioned about education, not only at board level, not only at the top of the game, but also grassroots. The example needs to be set at the top, the education needs to be given underneath that, and people need to be aware that there are consequences for this behaviour as well.
Honestly, do you think the example is being set at the top?
I think there are good examples being set, yeah, I definitely do. I'm very much involved in the game as a player, obviously, and working alongside the governing bodies, the FA, the PFA, LMA, the Premier League, and they're all working very hard to try and eradicate these issues.
And to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. Erich in Berlin, thank you for joining us from Germany, to the three of you at this table. It is a battle that still needs to be fought, and interesting since, I say you're with Kick It Out, to see that Mansfield Town, from the lower echelons of the English Football League, themselves the subject of an inquiry this week into racial abuse at a pre-season friendly. It never ends. Thank you for watching, thank you for joining us, and we hope to have your company next time. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, goodbye for now.